Chako, and I'm one of the co-editors of Cafe Dissensus magazine, and we are here right now in Washington Square Park at the heart of New York City, and we have come to New York University, which is very close to Washington Square Park, to interview Mr. Amit Khanna, the chairman of Reliance Entertainment. Thank you. Over to Musala.
Thank you, Mr. Khanna, for joining us for this interview.
My pleasure.
The first question I was going to ask you is, you did an undergrad degree in English literature from St. Stephen's, and then you were actually writing on films.
Yes.
And then you joined the film industry. And we were just curious to know, how did that transition happen from writing on films to actually acting in films and working on films?
Yeah. Actually, while I was doing my undergrad, I was interested in the arts, so I was an active participant in theatre, early television in India, some radio, and I used to write on cinema in the newspapers. So in the course of one of those interview I did with the big superstar Dev Anand, we struck a rapport, and we kept in touch, and actually, so at one point when he was going to make Hare Ram Hare Krishna, he asked me to help him with the script, which I did. I spent some time with him on location in Kathmandu, and then he asked me to, and then I sort of joined my postgrad, but he asked me to come to Bombay to work with him, and the offer was very tempting. Although my parents were very little perturbed that I was giving up my postgrad and moving to Bombay, but I did. So I actually landed up in Bombay right in the midst of activity, and I got involved right away.
Mm-hmm.
So there was not much transition or transitory time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. So how was the experience of working with Dev Anand? Because he was such a big star at the time.
Well, he was a very friendly person and very encouraging to young people. And circumstances so happened that his company itself, Navketan, which was a large studio, was going through a bit of a change. Yash Johar, who was Karan Johar's father, used to look after the Navketan. And he decided to actually move out of the film industry for a while.
Okay.
So I was just 21, and I was literally handed charge of the largest studio in India.
Wow.
So it was baptism by fire.
And Navketan was based in Pune those days?
No, in Bombay.
Oh, it was based in Bombay. And it was one of those studios which came up before the licensing Raj started?
No, it started in 1949 with a film called with a film called Afsar, which starred Dev Anand and Suraya, and it was directed by Chetan Anand.
Okay, because in your NYU talk the other day, you said that during the Second World War, some of the older theatres actually were closed.
Well, he became a star during the Second World War.
Mm-hmm.
He started his own production company. He and Raj Kapoor started in 48, RK Studios, and he started in 49.
Okay. And now to talk about your film career, you have acted, you have produced.
No, I have not acted.
You have not acted?
No,
because,
I have not acted.
Because some information I got on the net.
No, that's another Amit Khanna, and they confuse me with him. He's a young boy.
Oh, really?
Nephew of Govinda.
Oh, really?
Who's an actor.
Because I thought...
Who was incidentally named after me, my parents, but
okay.
I've written, I have directed, I have produced.
Yeah. So which one? And you have been an award-winning. You have been a lyricist as well.
Yes, I have been a lyricist.
And you have written dialogues for Mahesh Bhatt Saransh.
Yeah.
So which one do you actually like the most among all these roles that you played?
I was primarily a writer, so I enjoy writing, whether it is songs or scripts. But then, having spent so many years, and I had the chance to work in all the disciplines of the medium. So, and you're passionate about it. So you learn as you grow. And the key is keep your mind open and learn things. I was always been a voracious reader. I was clued into international cinema. And I had friends from all disciplines and all kinds of filmmaking. So I have been fortunate that I had a holistic sort of uh, early part of my career where I interacted with some of the best minds, both from the older generation and the younger generations. So while I wrote scripts which were part of the alternate cinema, I also produced and was involved in some of the most mega budget films of the time. And very early in my career, I just so happened that I was articulate and came from a slightly different background. So I got absorbed in the industry uh, activity, which is the producers and guild and the writers association and the directors association. So I became an active participant in the industry policy and politics, and that helped me grow and understand the complexity of this business.
Right. And then you, from film, you decided to move to the corporate sector and you headed the
No,
Plus channel.
that was the longest transition. I
Okay.
first became an independent producer with a film called Man Pasand, which Basu Chatterjee directed.
Mhm.
Then I became a director. Then I've done short films, I've done documentaries. I have done television shows for Doordarshan. And it was then in 1989 I decided to actually formally set up a company, which then grew very quickly into India's first integrated media company.
Right. And in 1995, your company produced A Mouthful of Sky, the first English series in India.
Yes, we did
And-
the first, in fact, because it was early days in television, so we pioneered a lot of things. We pioneered business news on television. We pioneered magazine programming on television in India. We did children's programming. We did the first mega soap, Swabhiman, which was written by Shobha Day and directed by Mahesh Bhatt and had a huge cast. It ran for 3 years. And simultaneously we produced A Mouthful of Sky, which was based on a story by an English Indo-Anglican writer, Ashok Banker.
Mhm.
And so it's been interesting. We did then we were doing because Doordarshan was the main channel, and so we were doing roughly 3 hours of programming every day.
Right. And I remember I was in college those days when A Mouthful of Sky was actually
Yes.
screened, and I was in a very small town where people didn't speak English, but
Yes.
because I was an English literature student,
Yes.
I used to watch it, and I sort of liked, this sort of a new kind of programming.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that no one has ever tried it after that.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you that question, that why didn't anyone try
because
again?
I think it's just because television has a tendency of working with very popular formats, and as the socio economic profile and the demographic changed of the audience,
Mhm.
you started becoming more and more like popular television anywhere in the world. So you had more of these soaps, more of the reality programming and game shows, and people were less experimentative.
Right. So, keeping to the question of television and the kind of soaps now we get to watch every evening
Yeah.
in India, all the Saas Bahu kind of soap.
Yeah.
What's your feeling about those soaps? Are they regressive or do they really
Well, I think
portray
many of them
the
are
culture?
regressive. The problem is that today we are at crossroads, because the channel executives who commission these programming are usually Western educated people with big city sensibility, and the writers and the directors involved are small towners.
Mhm.
So there is a gap, sensibility gap, an attitudinal gap between the two. So you get the worst of both the worlds.
Right.
You're getting stereotypes from the city and the stereotypes from the small town, and that's why it becomes imitative,
Mhm.
and you think you've struck a formula, but actually it's a short-lived thing, and because television has something called the fatigue factor, which sets in very quickly.
Right.
So I think in next year or two you'll see some amount of experimentation on Indian television. More so now that it's become very competitive, We are we have 800 channels in 24 languages. Uh, we are the only.
Wow.
We have the largest number of news channels in the world, close to 400 or 300. So there's too much of, and now with as broadband spreads, you will have people, more and more younger people have other options. Whether it's online gaming or console gaming, or it is services like Netflix and torrents and other online platforms which people access more and different and varied kind of content. So as I've mentioned in a couple of my talks here at NYU, that as we go forward, and this is going to be a global trend, that we are going to see more personalized segmentation of media, where media will be consumed in multiple manner, on multiple devices simultaneously. So you're not going to be doing one thing at one time. You could be listening to a music on your iPad, reading a book, and then also watching something on the television and dividing your time. So it's a very busy mind space, and at some point, innovation will drive eyeballs.
Okay. So what you're talking about is mostly innovation in form, but what I'm thinking...
it's just form is not good enough.
Okay.
It has to be innovative content.
Right.
We are currently in the midst of what I call the attention economy, which is about grabbing eyeballs. But the next stage of the attention economy is engagement economy,
Right.
because you cannot just monetize attention. If you want to monetize attention, you need to engage minds, engage people. So that requires innovation, not merely in form, but in content.
Right.
Content which is dynamic, which is responsive, and as broadband penetration spreads in India, as it's doing all over the world, more and more interactivity, and then eventually immersive experiences will start dominating.
Yeah, thank you. And you headed the Plus channel for a while, and that must have been the early days of cable television in India.
Yes.
Right? So
Yes.
how was the experience of
Great.
spearheading
It was,
something
for
at
me,
that stage?
the most satisfying part of Plus Channel was that since it was an integrated thing, so we produced some great movies, a lot of award-winning films from some of the best filmmakers, which won a lot of awards, both nationally and internationally. We became a kind of a nursery of talent. And I can say with pride that almost 800 people who are working in film and television today have people who've been groomed in Plus Channel, and that's the most satisfying experience.
That's amazing to know.
Yeah.
And then you moved to Reliance
Well,
Entertainment.
I reached a stage where Plus Channel then had to grow beyond and had to raise funds, and that the Ambanis, who were friends, met me and they said, how much, I was trying to raise $50 million, which to me was a big amount of money. But they said, where will $50 million take you when you're competing with the Murdochs of the world?
Right.
So why don't you come and work with us? And I thought about it and I said, yes, it's good to chase personal dreams, but when you have a larger vision of the world, then you need more money, you need larger infrastructure. So that's how we joined hands.
Right, and as part of Reliance, being the chairperson of Reliance Entertainment, you have been responsible for some of the huge collaborations with Western companies and taking over screen spaces in the West.
Yeah.
How has that experiment been? Has it been successful so far?
Well, Mr. Anil Ambani, our chairman, was very clear that when we entered the entertainment space, that given the rapid globalization which is taking place, if we wanted to be full service media company, there was no way where we could just concentrate only on the large domestic audience. So we had to step out. So we looked for opportunities. Fortunately, some came our way, and we had built a good team which all worked together, and we were able to do some interesting things, and we're very happy because, like our partnership with DreamWorks here, we have a large services business here, digital services business, where we acquired a company called Lorry Digital, which became the bedrock, and then we bought a digital domain in partnership with a Chinese company, and so it's become a global world. And in the digital world, you can film in one place, you can process, and in another you can do the post production in the third place, and then depending on the kind of film you release accordingly in the market targeted market.
Yeah, so it's much more integrated now at the moment. The way
Yeah, well, people misunderstand integration. You cannot. There are very few films made in anywhere which travel global. Which go across language and ethnic barriers. But large number of films can address niche audiences across the world, and that's become possible because of digital technology.
Right. Because the medium of carrying the content has been very
also,
different. Yeah.
Online delivery and etc. have opened up new avenues.
Right. And finally, we wanted to talk about your huge mega project on Indian media that you're doing, that you're documenting the history of Indian media since the 18th century, which is kind of amazing. I've never heard anyone going back all the way to 18th century and documenting it. Yeah. Could you please elaborate on that project?
Well, this is something which is I've been passionate about for a while, and that's why I decided to withdraw from active business and devote my time before I get too old for research. Got together a team of researchers, and for the past 1 year we've been researching. I think it'll take us a little more time because there's very little material available about certain things. India doesn't have a very good record of archiving, so we are trying to source as much original material as we can, and hopefully then I'll start probably next year. Start documenting it, so it perhaps going to be a multi-volume project. Yeah.
And when you say Indian media, you mean all sorts of
everything.
media?
It means
print.
Starts everything from dance, music, theatre, then print, radio, television, cinema, and then new media.
Oh wow, that's a huge project.
Yeah.
And I think we'll end with the last question now. Where do you see the future of Indian entertainment industry in the next few years?
I think India has got it has a paradoxical situation. We have such a large domestic market, 1.2 billion people, and we have a large South Asian diaspora across the world who love Indian entertainment. So for 100 years or so, our filmmakers, our television producers have been looking at this large domestic market and part of this diaspora market. But I think times have come. As I said, there'll be basically two kinds of films which will be made, two kinds of television programming. So one will be the pan-global kind. So, in television this will be large formatted shows or live coverage of events like concerts and the Olympics. Cricket and soccer are becoming universally popular. So that kind of programming will travel across the world. A certain amount of documentaries, channels like National Geographic and Discovery or Travel and Living are showing the way. And on the other hand, similarly in films, you'll have the large event films, the franchises which are made in Hollywood, and the big Bollywood blockbusters, which will travel around the world. And then you'll have the more edgy, more experimental films, more edgier television programming, which will be more investigative, more socially relevant, and empowering, which will appeal to niche audiences around the world.
Right. And I thought I'll end with that question, but suddenly to my mind another question came. Who do you consider to be the most promising filmmaker in Bollywood now?
Well, there are several. They're each specializing in different kinds of films. So people like Rajkumar Hirani, who made Three Idiots in the Munna Bhai series, he's very good. He's very comfortable with the craft. Has a very easy narrative style, and he tackles unusual themes. Then you have younger directors like Anurag Kashyap, who's doing some brilliant work in the alternate space. You have Vikramaditya Motwani. You have Imtiaz Ali, who's doing some great work. We have some directors in the south, Rajamouli, Murgadas, who are doing great work. There's some Rituparna Ghosh, who unfortunately died, was doing some good work in Calcutta. So there are a lot of younger filmmakers, and even in the mainstream we have Aditya Chopra and his team, which is producing some great popular cinema, and yet willing to experiment new genre. There's Kabir Khan, there's Victor Acharya, there are other bright people like Jaideep Sani and Rakesh Mehra, who made Bhag Milka Bhag. Farhan Akhtar and Zoya Akhtar, both are very bright. So number of young bright talent, and I think that gives me a lot of confidence.
Thank you so much for talking to us and taking your time out.
My pleasure.